The collapse of the parasitic city was not a political failure. Nor was it a resource exhaustion event. It was a medical reaction. As the extraction teams bored through the final layer of the neural sheath protecting the host spinal column, they triggered a biological contingency that had lain dormant for eons. In pathology, we call this a cytokine storm, a massive, uncoordinated, and violent immune response. The host, effectively, caught a fever. Seismographic data recorded in the fossil record shows no tectonic plate movement. Yet the temperature within the thoracic valley spiked by 400 degrees Celsius in under an hour. This was not volcanic heat, it was metabolic. The dormant cells within the marrow, stimulated by the breach of the spinal fluid, ignited in a final, frantic attempt to sterilize the wound. The amber, the very substance the civilization relied upon for light and life, underwent an instantaneous phase change. It reverted to its primal function, a clotting agent. Imagine the horror of those final moments. The fluid flowing through the miles of pipeline, the reservoirs stored in the city centers, the lamps burning in their homes, all of it simultaneously expanded and hardened. The extraction tunnels became pressurized cannons of rapid calcifying foam. The residents were not crushed by falling rocks, they were drowned in the blood of their god, which then turned to stone around them. We found the royal siphon team in the deepest shaft. They are perfectly preserved, encased in a translucent, golden tomb of hardened amber. Their expressions are not of fear, but of confusion. They are suspended in the act of turning valves, trying to shut off the flow that had already become a solid wall. Shutterstock. The city itself was sealed. The hexagonal voids of the honeycomb lattice were filled in, layer by layer, as the host attempted to heal the damage done to its structure. The immune response did not differentiate between the mining equipment and the miners. To the immune system of a planetary-scale organism, a human being is indistinguishable from a virus. It identified the infection, and it encapsulated it. The white spine is no longer hollow. The cities are still there, deep inside the bone, but they are now solid inclusions, flaws in the gem. The civilization that sought to consume the god was ultimately digested by it. Wind down. I am closing the containment unit on sample 88 alpha. The iridescence of the bone fragment seems to have dulled since we removed it from the sterile field. A reminder that it belongs to a biology we do not fully understand. This dossier serves as a grim corrective to the anthropocentric view of the universe. We often assume that if we can land on a world, we own it. We assume that dead things stay dead. But the fate of the marrow miners teaches us that there is a hierarchy to existence. We are small, fragile, and transient. When we build upon the bones of giants, we must step lightly, for if we bite too deep, we may find that the mountain still has teeth. Moving deeper into the anatomy of the landscape, we leave the wind-scoured exterior of the ribs and enter the marrow cavity. It is here, within the porous, honeycomb lattice of the cancellous bone, that we find the evidence of habitation. Reference the architectural cross-section of Rib 4 South. Getty Images. At first glance, the complex appears to be a natural formation, a series of caves eroded by water. But look closer at the geometry. These voids are not random. They are hexagonal. They are planned. The civilization did not build upon the land, they built into the quartz. They hollowed out the trabecular meshwork, the spongy interior of the bone, and constructed a suspended metropolis. We see evidence of walkways anchored directly into the calcified struts of the host, bridging the gaps between the massive osteons. It was a vertical city, protected from the elements by the rib's hard outer shell, a parasitic hive nesting safely within the ribcage of a dead god. But why burrow into the bone? The answer lies in the substance we found crusted inside the extraction pipes recovered from the lower stratum. We call it the amber. To the inhabitants, this was not merely a mineral deposit, it was a divine fluid. The fossilized marrow of the host had retained potent, anomalous chemical properties. Spectrographic analysis of the residue inside this ceremonial siphon, note the filigree work on the nozzle, indicates a compound rich in stem cell analogues and high-density lipids. It was a fuel source. Yes, burning with a clean, smokeless white flame that illuminated their cavernous cities. But it was also a food source. And, if the translation of the glyphs carved into the mining equipment is correct. It was a narcotic. The translation matrix for their dialect is difficult, as it is based entirely on biological metaphors. They did not have a word for mining, they used a glyph that translates roughly to bloodletting or sacred surgery. This suggests a society governed by a Necro-Theology. They worshipped the host, yet their primary act of worship was to consume it. I find this theological structure fascinatingly hypocritical. They viewed the host as the provider of all life, yet they systematically drained it. Observe the schematic of the Great Auger, found in the central plaza. It is a drill, designed to pierce the petrified septa of the bone and tap into the deep marrow reservoirs. But the drill is shaped like a prayer wheel. Every rotation of the bit was a mantra. They justified their parasitism by framing it as a communion. To eat the god was to honor the god. The cultural artifacts reflect this obsession with the organic. We found no metal tools. Everything, from their cutlery to their weapons, was fashioned from the splintered remains of the host itself. They used the host to dismantle the host. There is a specific cruelty in this. Imagine a tick that fashions a needle from the bone of the dog it feeds upon. Yet, we cannot deny the efficacy of their adaptation. The amber prolonged their lives. The osteological remains of the humanoid inhabitants, the parasites, if we are to be blunt, show signs of extreme longevity. We found skeletons that suggest individuals lived for 3, perhaps 4 centuries. The marrow slowed their cellular decay. They were becoming, in a biological sense, less human and more like the entity they inhabited. Their own bones showed thickening, a mimicry of the host's density. However, a closer look at the excavation site reveals the scale of their greed. They did not stop at the surface marrow. The mapping drones identified deep shaft mines boring toward the spinal column, the central nervous system of the host. They were chasing the high amber, the cerebrospinal fluid, believing it to contain the soul of the deity. There is a distinct shift in the artistic style of the wall carvings as they dug deeper. The early carvings show reverence, figures bowing to the ribs. The later carvings, found in the deep shafts, show arrogance. We see figures standing on the host, commanding it. The text accompanying these later reliefs translates to, "The flesh is silence. The marrow is ours." They had forgotten that they were guests inside a biological entity. They mistook the host's stillness for consent. They believed that because the god was dead, it was defenseless. They failed to understand that in biology, death is not always an absolute state. There are reflexes. There are immune systems that persist long after the consciousness has faded. And there are boundaries that, when crossed, trigger a reaction that no amount of prayer can suppress. Does a civilization choose its deity? Or does it merely colonize the corpse of a higher power? We are conditioned to view geography as an inanimate stage, a collection of tectonic accidents and erosion upon which history plays out. But the geological survey before us demands a redefinition of the ground beneath our feet. If we inhabit a structure built from calcium and collagen rather than granite and basalt, are we architects, or are we merely a parasitic infection? This canister contains core sample 88 alpha, the only physical evidence retrieved from the exclusion zone. Let us break the seal on the containment unit and document what remains. At first tactile encounter, the sample appears to be a cylinder of high-grade alabaster or perhaps a dense, metamorphic marble. It is cool to the touch, opaque, and possesses a milky, iridescent sheen under the laboratory fluorescence. However, standard geological dating methods failed immediately. The mass spectrometer could not find the expected silicate signatures of planetary crust. Instead, the readout screamed a single, impossible composition: hydroxyapatite, collagen matrices, and trace amounts of fossilized marrow. This is not stone. This is bone. Reference the holographic topology map of Sector 4, currently projected above the examination table. We are looking at the White Spine mountain range, a jagged serration of peaks that dominate the northern hemisphere of the target world. For centuries, orbital scans dismissed these formations as uplifted limestone deposits, similar to the Dolomites of Earth. It was only when the atmospheric interfering layer cleared that we saw the curvature. Adjusting for the planet's curvature, the visual data is undeniable. These are not mountains. They are ribs. We are observing a biological structure of a magnitude that defies the square-cube law of terrestrial biology. Each peak is the distal end of a thoracic rib, rising 4,000 meters into the stratosphere before curving inward to form a protective canopy over the valley floor. The valley itself is the thoracic cavity. The ground is the sternum. The sheer scale induces a sense of vertigo even in the safety of this archive. We are looking at the calcified remains of a singular organism. Let us call it the host, that was large enough to impact the planet's rotation. Note the texture on the exterior of the sample, seen here in the macro lens feed. This rough, pitted surface was originally classified as wind erosion. We now understand it to be the fossilized remains of the periosteum, the connective tissue that once sheathed the bone. The deep fissures running vertically down the mountain faces are not glacial striations, they are vascular channels. We are talking about haversian canals the size of subway tunnels. Arteries that once pumped a volume of blood equivalent to a terrestrial river system. The preservation is absolute. The host did not decay in the traditional sense, it calcified. Whether through natural senility or a sudden, localized shift in atmospheric chemistry, the organism underwent rapid petrification, locking its cellular structure in a timeless stasis. The result is a landscape that mimics geology but retains the structural integrity of anatomy. I find myself hesitating to classify this as a landscape. It implies a passive environment. But bone is reactive. Bone remembers. As we move the scanner to the interior face of the rib, the side facing the valley where the civilization was located, we see anomalies in the trabecular meshwork. Here, look at this cross-section. The bone density is lower. The lattice is brittle. This was not caused by the death of the host. This damage occurred post-mortem. It is evidence of quarrying. The inhabitants of this valley did not just live in the shadow of these bones, they breached them. They tunneled into the marrow cavities. They treated this biological wonder as a resource deposit. It is a sobering realization, to the microscopic eye. A cathedral is just a pile of rocks. And to the desperate colonist, a god is just a mine.